The first thing she felt was the rope biting into her ankles. Not the pain yet, just the pressure, tight and unforgiving, cutting off the blood while the world hung upside down around her. The sun burned straight into her eyes, white and merciless, and the dry summer wind carried the smell of dust and river mud into her lungs. She was hanging head down beneath a wide old oak, her dress bunched in a way that left her fighting for dignity. Her hands tied tight, her heartbeat hammering so hard she thought it might tear her apart before the rope ever did. Somewhere nearby, a horse snorted, then another. She twisted, slow at first because panic wastes strength, and she knew that much. The rope creaked against the branch. Her boots scraped bark. Every movement sent a hot spike of pain through her legs. They had not tied her to kill her. They tied her to scare her. If she panicked, she'd give them the one thing they wanted most, her surrender. To leave her like a warning nailed to the land. A warning that said, sign the paper or next time we do not walk away. Minutes earlier, Silas Crow had stood in front of her with his hat low and his voice calm, the kind of calm that comes from knowing you own the ground under another person's feet. Sell the land, sign away the water, or hang here until you learn sense. He had not waited for her answer. Now she was alone, upside down, with sweat running into her eyes and the rope slowly cutting deeper into her skin. She did not scream, not yet. She rolled her hips, just enough to change the weight on the knot. Her breath came short, controlled. She pressed the side of her boot against the bark and twisted again. The knot slipped a finger's width. That tiny slip told her the man who tied it had been in a hurry. And hurried men make mistakes. That was all she needed. Her heart jumped, hope flashing bright and dangerous. She twisted harder. The rope burned. The bark tore at her dress. Fabric ripped with a sharp sound that echoed too loud in the quiet heat. In a quiet valley, one small sound can travel like a shout. Then the knot gave. One boot slipped free. Her body dropped. She hit the ground on her hands, hard enough to knock the air from her chest, dirt filling her mouth, pain shooting through her wrist. One leg still hung caught in the rope above her. The other sprawled useless beneath her. Her dress was torn open at the side, snagged and ruined. She gasped and tried to crawl, dragging herself through dust and weeds, knowing Crow's men might still be close enough to hear her breathe. That was when the shadow fell across her. Boots. Slow. Heavy. A man stood a few steps away and reins in one hand, a tired bay horse shifting behind him. He had gray at his temples and dust on his coat, the look of someone who had spent too many years under open sky. She did not know his name. She did not know if he worked for Crow. She only knew she could not stay like this another second. Her voice broke out of her before fear could stop it. "It's torn. Take it off for me." She cried. The words came out wrong, rushed and raw, but she meant the rope. The rope. Before it cut deeper, she wanted that rope off her ankle, right now. Before Crow's men decided to come back. The man did not move. He just stood there, staring. For a long breath, she thought he might turn away. Then she saw his eyes drop to the marks on her wrist. Dark, fresh, rope burns. He went still. Not at her, past her, at the fresh hoof prints in the dirt. His jaw locked like a man recognizing a signature. His hand tightened on the reins. He stepped closer, slow and careful, as if the ground itself might explode if he moved too fast. That was when she saw it too. Fresh tracks in the dirt. More than one horse. Crow's men had not gone far. They never went far when they expected a woman to break. The man reached for his knife, not rushing, not shaking. He cut the rope in one clean motion. A clean cut is what you do when you've made up your mind. Her leg dropped free. She collapsed onto the ground, curling in on herself, breathing hard, shaking now that the danger had cracked open inside her. The man backed away a step, giving her space, his eyes never leaving the tree line. "You hurt bad," he said quietly. She shook her head. "Bad enough," she answered. He glanced at the torn dress, then away again, respectful, careful. That told her something about him. Not enough to trust him, but enough to hope. "My name's Clara," she said, because silence felt heavier than pain. He nodded once. "Caleb." Another sound drifted through the heat, Hoofbeats, distant, watching. Caleb's hand tightened on the reins. He understood now. This was not a girl who tripped and fell. This was a message, Crow's kind of message. The worst part about a message like that is how fast a whole town learns to pretend it never saw it. And by cutting that rope, by standing under that oak tree with her shaking in the dirt, Caleb Hartman had just answered it. Clara looked up at him, dust on her face, eyes bright with fear and stubborn fire. "They want my land," she said. "They want the water that runs through it, and they won't stop." Caleb did not answer right away. He looked at the tree, the rope still hanging, the torn fabric caught on the bark. Then he looked back toward the valley, where Crow's reach stretched farther than most men like to admit. Helping her would cost him, and Caleb could already feel the bill coming due. Walking away would let him sleep. He exhaled slow, like a man standing at the edge of something he had sworn never to step into again. So here's the question. When a man sees injustice hanging from a tree in the summer heat, does he cut it down and risk everything, or does he ride on and let the land remember his silence? Caleb did not rush her. That alone told Clara she might live through this day. He took his canteen and set it on the ground near her, close enough to reach, but not so close it felt like pressure. Then he stepped back again, eyes still on the trees, listening to the land the way old ranchers do. The valley was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that watches you. "You can sit up slow," he said. "No hurry." Clara pushed herself upright. Breath still shaky, a dirt streaked across her cheek. Her ankle throbbed, but it held. She drank, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, and finally looked at him proper. "You didn't have to cut me down," she said. Caleb shrugged. "I did. That was all." He walked her to his horse and helped her settle onto a flat rock beneath the oak's shade. The rope still dangled above them, a reminder that the land itself had eyes today. "They'll come back," she said. "Maybe," he answered, "but not fast. They didn't tie her to finish it. Not yet." That gave her a moment to breathe. Caleb led his horse ahead, checking the ground, reading tracks like lines in a book. He saw 3 sets of hooves, fresh, heavy. One turned back toward the valley. Crow never wasted steps. "Who did this?" Caleb asked, already knowing. She hesitated, then said the name. "Silas Crow." Caleb let out a slow breath through his nose. "That figures." They started toward his ranch, moving through dry grass and low hills baked brown by summer. The walk was slow. Claire limped, stubborn about it, refusing help until her leg gave a warning pulse that made her wince. Caleb caught her elbow, steady and quiet. "You keep that up," he said. "You'll be worse tomorrow." She allowed it then. As they walked, she told him enough to matter, and not enough to get herself killed if he turned out wrong. Her father had owned a small piece of land where the water cut through shallow stone, not much to look at. But in dry years, it mattered. After he died, Crow showed up with papers and smiles, talking about fair prices and easy living. When she said no, the smiles stopped. "He doesn't want the land," she said. "He wants the water." Caleb nodded. "Same thing out here." They reached his ranch by late afternoon. A place like that looks small until the wrong man decides it matters. A modest spread, nothing fancy, a few head of cattle. A windmill that creaked like an old man's knees. It was the kind of place Crow usually ignored, which meant it was about to matter. Caleb checked her ankle again, wrapped it clean, then left her on the porch with a chair and shade. He moved with the ease of habit, doing small things that said he had lived alone a long time and learned to manage. A man who lives alone learns to build hiding places into ordinary things. Clara watched him, the way he set his hat down, just so, the way he paused before looking back toward the valley. "You could walk away," she said. He did not answer at first. I could," he said finally, "but that rope would still be hanging there." She looked down at her torn dress, then away. "He'll make it look like your fault." Caleb gave a thin smile. Crow always does. He didn't just win with violence. He won by making decent people doubt what they saw. He told her then. Not the whole story, just enough. He had worn a badge once, thought rules were enough to keep men honest. Learned the hard way that paper bends easier than people think. I quit before it killed what was left of me, he said. Clara nodded. She understood that kind of quitting. As the sun dipped lower, a rider appeared on the far edge of the property. Just one, watching. A watcher is worse than a threat because it means someone is taking notes. Not close enough to talk, close enough to be seen. Caleb did not reach for his rifle. Neither did the rider. That was the point. They know you're here, Clara said. Yeah, Caleb answered. They want me to know they know. He fed his horses, moved his cattle closer to the water. Small choices that said he was already planning for trouble. When the rider finally turned away, Clara felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight all day. Why me? She asked. Why not scare someone else? Caleb leaned against the fence. Because you're young. Because you're alone. Because Crow thinks fear works better than bullets. He looked at her then, really looked, and his voice softened. He's wrong sometimes. They sat in silence as the evening cooled. Cicadas starting up like an old engine turning over. Clara reached into her satchel and pulled out folded papers, worn soft from being handled too much. I didn't tell him everything, she said. I kept copies. Copies are hope, but originals are power. And Crow knew the difference. Caleb did not touch them. He did not even ask to see them yet. Smart, he said. She met his eyes. If you help me, he won't stop with me. Caleb nodded. I know. That was the moment Clara understood this was not just about land anymore. This was about whether a man who had already walked away once would turn back toward the fire. Night settled in. Somewhere in the valley, a coyote called. Caleb stood and looked out over his ranch, quiet and plain and suddenly in danger. Get some rest, he said. Tomorrow we figure out how deep Crow's hand goes. And before we go any further, if you've been listening this far, I'd be glad to have you here again. Take a second and subscribe if these old stories still matter to you. Pour yourself a cup of tea, settle back, and tell me something. What time is it where you're listening, and where are you hearing this story from? Because tomorrow, this quiet valley is going to decide what kind of men still belong on it, and Crow doesn't like decisions he can't control. That night, Clara did not sleep like a safe person sleeps. She slept like someone waiting for a boot step on wood. Every little sound had a shape, a nail cooling, a horse shifting, a coyote far off that could have been a man if you listened too hard. Caleb sat at the table with a lantern turned low, staring at the papers she'd shown him, not touching them, just reading the edges of the story the way you read a man's face. He did not like how clean Crow's pressure felt. It was not the pressure of a bully in a bar. It was the pressure of someone who had done this before. Someone who knew exactly where fear lived in a valley. Near midnight, a small pebble clicked against the porch post. Not loud, just deliberate. Caleb stood, slow, and stepped outside with no lamp. The moon was thin. The wind was still. On the dirt near the steps he found something that had not been there an hour earlier. A strip of paper, folded once, held down with a small stone. No name, no signature. Just a few words written in a neat hand. Tomorrow. Oak tree. Bring the girl. It wasn't an invitation, it was a schedule, and Crow expected the world to obey it. Caleb read it twice, then crumpled it in his fist and looked out toward the dark line of hills. Clara's voice came from behind him. Quiet. Was that for me? Caleb did not turn around yet. It was for both of us, he said, and that was the moment the ranch stopped being a home and started being a battlefield. Morning came in quiet, the kind of quiet that makes a man uneasy. The sun rose slow over the hills, light spilling across dry grass and fence posts that had stood longer than most memories. Caleb was already up, moving like he had not slept much. Coffee boiled on the stove, horses shifted in their pens. Everything looked the same, which meant it was not. Clara woke with a stiff ankle and a knot in her chest she could not rub away. She stepped onto the porch and breathed in the smell of dust and hay and old wood. It felt safer than the oak tree had, but not safe enough to forget. Caleb handed her a cup of coffee without a word. She took it. Warmth helped. They did not talk about Crow right away. Old habits die slow. Caleb fixed a loose board on the fence. Clara watched the valley. A hawk circled high, patient. By mid-morning, Caleb saddled his horse. "We're going to town," he said. Clara looked at him. Together. Yes, that mattered. The ride toward Los Olivos was steady, not rushed. Caleb kept to open ground where he could see far ahead. Clara noticed how he chose every turn with care, like a man who had learned what blind corners cost. They reached town near noon. Los Olivos was small but busy, the kind of place where news moved faster than wagons. People noticed them. Some nodded at Caleb. Some looked twice at Clara and then away. Caleb tied his horse and stepped down easy. They went first to a man named Turner, a surveyor who had worked the valley years back. Turner remembered Clara's father. He remembered Crow, too. He did not want trouble. "I don't keep old books," he said. "Not anymore." Caleb thanked him anyway. That was when the murmuring started. Whispers passed from one porch to the next. Eyes followed them. A woman crossed the street to avoid Clara. A man spat and shook his head. Caleb felt it settle on his shoulders like a coat he did not ask for. At the livery stable, a young ranch hand stared too long. "You the one with the girl under the oak?" he said. Caleb turned slow. "What about it?" he asked. The boy swallowed. "They say you did it." That was when Deputy Sheriff Amos Klein stepped out from the shade. Klein smiled like a man who enjoyed the heat. His badge caught the light. Now, Klein said. "Let's not spread stories." He tipped his hat to Clara. His eyes lingered just a second too long. "Miss," he said. "Rough business yesterday." Clara said nothing. Klein turned to Caleb. "Crow's been asking questions." "Folks get nervous when ropes are involved." Caleb held his gaze. "Funny. I thought ropes were your line of work." A few men nearby stiffened. Klein's smile thinned. "Watch yourself." Then he leaned closer and lowered his voice. "Best advice. Let this go." Caleb nodded once. Appreciate the concern. They walked on. Clara's heart pounded. He's already turned it. Caleb did not deny it. They stopped for water. Clara rested her ankle. Caleb scanned the street. Crow did not show his face. He did not have to. In the back of a small store. Clara finally pulled the folded papers from her satchel. Her hands shook, not from fear now, but from the weight of them. "These are copies," she said. "The originals are hidden." "Not in town," Clara added. "Last night I moved them somewhere no one would think to look." "On your place," she said. "Only for a night." Caleb read enough to understand the shape of it. Water rights, old signatures, dates that did not line up clean. "He's been fixing the past," Caleb said. "Yes," Clara answered. "And if he finishes, no one will be able to prove it." They were not alone. Jed Morrow stood across the street, pretending not to watch. He leaned against a post, hat low, eyes sharp. When Clara noticed him, he tipped his hat and turned away. Caleb saw it too. "Who's that?" Clara asked. "A problem," Caleb said. They left town not long after, the air thick with looks and half words. As they rode out, Clara felt something shift. Los Olivos was not just unfriendly. It was primed. A primed town only needs one spark, and Crow was carrying matches halfway home. Caleb reined in. "You need to know something," he said. She waited. "I wore a badge once. Thought rules mattered more than men. I was wrong." He did not say more. He did not have to. Caleb leaned on the fence beside Clara. "This is how it starts," he said. "Crow pushes until you push back. Then he tells the world you started it." Clara looked out at the valley. Her land lay somewhere beyond the hills, quiet and patient. "I won't sign," she said. Caleb nodded. "I didn't think you would." As dusk settled, a sound carried on the wind. Hooves, more than one. Coming closer. Caleb straightened, eyes narrowing, and that was when he understood. Crow was done warning. When fear stops working, men like Crow don't calm down. They escalate. The horses reached the fence line just after sundown, not charging, not hiding either. They stopped where the grass met the hard dirt. 5 riders spread loose, close enough to be counted, far enough to pretend they were only passing through. Caleb stood still beside the barn, hand resting on the rail, eyes steady. This was Crow's way. No rush, no words, just pressure. Clara watched from the porch, ankles stiff, heart tight. She knew those men were not there to talk. They were there to make sure fear stayed fresh. After a long minute, one rider turned his horse, then another. They drifted off the way smoke does, slow and sure, leaving the night heavier than before. Caleb did not move until they were gone. "They're marking time," he said. Clara swallowed. "What do we do?" Caleb looked at the sky. The stars were sharp, clear weather, good riding. "We stopped letting Crow set the pace." Caleb went to the tack room and pulled down a small tin box from a high shelf. It had dust on it like it had not been touched in years. He opened it and took out 2 things, a worn badge wrapped in cloth and a folded page that looked like it had been refolded 100 times. Clara didn't ask. She just watched. Caleb set the badge back in the box. He did not put it on. He was not that man anymore. But he kept the page. On it were names, old names, ranchers, a judge down the coast, a clerk who handled records, men who had once said they stood for law until Crow helped them forget. Clara realized then this was bigger than her father's land. Crow had been building a net for years, and the valley had been learning to breathe inside it. Caleb packed the papers in oilcloth like they were dynamite. Then he checked the cinch on Clara's saddle twice, not because he doubted the leather, but because he refused to lose her to something stupid. He glanced at her ankle. "You sure you can ride?" he asked. Clara lifted her chin. "I can." Caleb gave a faint smile, the kind that shows up when a man is worried and impressed at the same time. "All right then," he said. "Let's go borrow some daylight." That night, Caleb packed light, papers, a little food, water. He wrote a short note and folded it carefully. "We ride early," he said. "We go south." Clara knew what that meant before he said it. Santa Barbara, not for comfort, for reach. They left before dawn, the ranch quiet behind them, the land opened wide, hills rolling toward the coast, dry and pale under the first light. Caleb chose routes that stayed high where possible, places you could see trouble coming. By mid-morning, Clara's ankle burned. She did not complain. Caleb noticed anyway. He slowed the pace, made a small camp under low brush where the wind cut some of the heat. As they rested, Caleb took out the papers again. "These copies," he said. "You sure they match?" Clara nodded. "I checked them 3 times. Good." He wrapped them in oilcloth and tied them to his saddle. "If something happens," he said, "you keep going." She looked at him. "And you?" He met her eyes. "I won't be far." They moved again, the road narrowing as hills closed in. By afternoon, they reached the place where the road squeezed between rock and brush, a narrow throat locals called Gaviota Pass. It was the kind of country where shadows could hide a dozen men. Clara felt the hair on her arms rise, not from cold, from instinct. This pass had a reputation, the kind you hear in half-jokes at a feed store, a place where a man could disappear and the rocks would keep the secret. Caleb slowed his horse to a walk and listened again, not for sound, but for absence. Birds had gone quiet. Even the insects seemed to hold their breath. He pointed with 2 fingers toward a pale mark in the dirt. "See that?" he said. Clara leaned forward. "A wheel rut, fresh, cut deep." "And that," Caleb added, "a second rut, lighter, as if a wagon had been forced off the main track for a moment, then corrected." Caleb's face hardened. "No ranch wagon does that unless someone makes it," he said. Clara swallowed. "You think they're waiting for us?" Caleb shook his head once. "Not us. The paper." He looked back toward her saddlebag where the oilcloth bundle rode. "They don't have to catch us," he said. "They just have to stop what we're carrying." Clara stared down the road, suddenly understanding what kind of war this was. Not a war of gunfire. A war of ink. Caleb nudged his horse forward, and his voice dropped low. "If you hear me say down," he said, "you don't think..." You just do it. Clara nodded, jaw tight. Caleb lifted one hand and the whole world seemed to hold still. Listen, he said. Clara heard it then. Not hooves, not yet. Voices, low. Too many. Caleb guided them off the main track, keeping to broken ground where wheels did not go. They climbed slow, breath tight, sweat running. From above, the road looked like a thin line where a man could get trapped. Below them, a stage rolled through, dust trailing, driver hunched low. Then it happened fast. Shots cracked, horses screamed. The stage lurched. Men poured out of the rocks, faces covered, moving like they had practiced it before. Caleb pulled Clara back, hard and quiet. Stay down, he said. They watched from above as the robbery unfolded. Not sloppy, not cruel. Efficient. This was not a random crime. That stage carried mail and land records on its way toward Santa Barbara. The kind of paper that could ruin Crow if it ever reached the right hands. Crow was not only chasing Clara, he was chasing the story on paper. This was Crow telling them the paper trail would not travel safely. Caleb's jaw set. Crow was not just squeezing land, and he was reaching wider. Mail, records, anything that could tie him down. They waited until it was over. When the riders fled, Caleb moved. They picked their way down. Careful. The stage driver was alive, shaken, cursing. One guard groaned, bleeding but breathing. Caleb helped where he could. He did not linger. Clara saw it then. The way his hands moved, the way he spoke to calm the wounded. You've done this before, she said once they were clear. He nodded. Too many times. They reached Santa Barbara by nightfall. Lights low, the smell of salt in the air. Caleb did not go to the sheriff. He went to the post office, inside. He spoke with a man who listened more than he talked. The man's eyes flicked to a ledger stamped with a seal Clara didn't recognize. If Crow's hands are in the mail, he said quietly, someone higher up will want a word. Papers changed hands. Names were written. The man slid the paper away like it was evidence, not ink. This robbery, Caleb said. It ties in. The man nodded. It will. Outside, Clara let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for days. This helps, she said. It gives weight. Caleb answered. Crow hates weight. If he makes a public show, the clerk added, that's where the law will finally have room to breathe. They did not stay long. Caleb knew better. On the ride back, Clara asked the question she'd been holding. Why did you really leave the badge? Caleb was quiet a long time. Because I watched a good man lose everything on paper that was clean but wrong, he said, and I told myself rules mattered more than truth. He did not look at her when he spoke next. I won't do that again. The night caught them halfway home. They camped where the hills flattened, fire low, stars wide. Clara slept light. Caleb did not sleep much at all. Near dawn, a sound woke him. Hooves. Close. Too close. He reached for his rifle as shadows moved beyond the firelight. Crow had not waited, and the next move was not going to be quiet. By sunrise, Caleb was going to learn whether Crow came to bargain or to bury. The sound came again. Hooves, slow and deliberate, circling just beyond the firelight. Caleb stayed still, rifle low, breath measured. He did not wake Clara right away. Panic spreads faster than truth in the dark. The riders stopped where the night swallowed them. A voice carried, calm and practiced. Caleb. The man called. We just want to talk. Caleb answered with silence. Minutes passed. The fire popped once. Then the riders withdrew, fading back into the hills like they had never been there. Caleb let the night settle before he moved. They broke camp at first light. No fire. No coffee. Just motion. Clara could feel it now. The pressure had changed. This was no longer watching. This was closing. They rode hard toward the ranch, cutting across open ground. Caleb checked the ridges, the gullies, the long lines where men like to hide. They reached the fence by late morning. The gate hung open. That told them everything. Caleb dismounted and held up a hand. Claire stayed back, heart pounding. The yard looked wrong, too quiet. A bucket tipped over, a door not quite shut. Then he saw the tracks, more than before. Caleb moved fast now, but careful. Scanning corners, listening for breath. The house was empty. No blood, no struggle inside. Clara felt cold despite the heat. Caleb opened the desk drawer's false bottom, then froze. The originals, he said. He took the originals. Now Crow could rewrite the past and call it law. Crow had not come for a fight. He had come for the one thing that could bury him on paper. They found the sign by the old corral, a rope coil left on purpose, a message carved into the post. Signed today. Claire's hands shook. Caleb steadied her. He wants an audience, he said. They did not have long to think. Crow was not a man who waited without reason. By noon, word reached them through a neighbor who did not look Caleb in the eye. Claire was being held near the river bend, where the oak trees spread wide and the land dipped low. People would be there. Witnesses. Crow wanted the signing to feel clean. Caleb rode alone. He left his rifle behind, took only a revolver he hoped not to use. He did not want this to turn into something he could not undo. The crowd was small but tense, ranchers. A few townsfolk. Deputy Sheriff Klein stood near the front, hands folded, face neutral. Clara stood beneath the oak, wrists bound in front this time, chin high. Her ankle was wrapped, but she stood on it anyway. Crow stepped forward with papers in his hand, smiling like this was a business meeting. "Let us finish this," he said. "No more trouble." Caleb dismounted and walked into the open. "You started the trouble," he said. Crow shrugged. "I'm ending it." Klein cleared his throat. "This is legal," he said. "All proper." Caleb looked at the faces around him. Some avoided his eyes. Some looked ashamed. Some looked relieved they were not the ones tied. Crow held out the pen. A pen in a bully's hand can be more dangerous than a gun in the right moment. Clara did not move. Caleb took a step closer. "That paper fixes more than water," he said. "It fixes lies." Crow's smile tightened. "Careful." That was when Jed Morrow shifted. Just a step. Just enough. Caleb had seen that look before, the look of a hired hand, realizing he was about to be the next man thrown under the wagon. Caleb saw it. Jed had been quiet all morning, eyes hollow, jaw clenched. He looked at Crow now like a man measuring the distance between who he was and who he wanted to be. Crow noticed, too. "Stay where you are," Crow said. Jed did not. Caleb spoke then, not loud, but clear. "The stage robbery tied you to the mail," he said. "Record? Names? It brings men who do not care about your land deals." A murmur moved through the crowd. Klein's face changed. Crow laughed once, sharp. "You have nothing." Jed stepped forward again. "You promised," Jed said. "You promised me clean." Crow turned on him. "Get back." Jed did not. That was the crack. Caleb took it. He pulled a folded packet from his coat and handed it to the nearest rancher. "Copies," he said. "Water right. Old signatures. Look at the dates." Hands reached out. Papers passed. Crow lunged. Caleb moved faster. He did not draw. He stepped into Crow, shoulder to chest, driving him back into the dirt. The crowd gasped. Someone shouted. Klein reached for his gun. Jed grabbed his arm. "No," Jed said. "Not this time." Everything froze. The sound of horses cut through the moment. Different horses. Hard-ridden. Men in dust and travel coats rode in, eyes sharp, faces set. Crow knew the look. So did Klein. The law had weight now. Clara breathed for the first time in what felt like hours. Crow was taken without ceremony. Klein tried to speak. No one listened. The oak tree stood over it all, silent and old. Afterward, when the crowd thinned and the river kept running like it always had, Caleb cut the rope from Clara's wrist. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. "Because you came?" Caleb looked at the land, the water, the people drifting away. "This isn't done," he said, and as they stood there under the same oak where fear had started, the question hung heavy in the air. When a man loses control in public, What does he do next to get it back? The valley felt different after the dust settled, not because the danger was gone, but because everyone had finally seen it in daylight. Not quieter, just honest. People drifted away in small groups, speaking low, thinking hard. The oak tree stayed where it always had, wide and patient. Roots deep in ground that had seen worse days than this. Clara sat on a flat stone near the water, her hands free now, her ankle resting, her eyes on the slow bend of the river. Caleb stood a few steps back, hat in his hands, watching the land the way men do when they are measuring what comes next. Whoa! Crow was gone, not erased, just finished here. Deputy Klein rode away without a word, lighter by a badge and heavier by a truth he could not outrun. The water kept moving. It always does. Caleb walked over and sat on the ground, careful not to crowd her. "You did good," he said. Clara shook her head. "I did what I had to." He nodded. That's usually what good looks like. They stayed there a while, not talking much, the kind of silence that heals instead of hurting. Later, as the sun leaned west, Clara asked the question that had been waiting. "What happens now?" Caleb smiled faintly. "Now we live with our choices." He told her he would help make the papers right. Not as a favor, as a responsibility. He told her the ranch would need hands, and the water would need watching. He did not promise ease. He promised effort. Clara listened, and something in her shoulders finally let go. That night, Caleb walked the fence line alone. He checked posts. He listened for sounds that did not belong. He found none. When he returned to the porch, Clara was there with 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one. "No words needed. This is the part where I step in for a moment, because stories like this do not stay on the page. They walk into your life whether you ask them to or not. I have seen men walk past wrong because it was easier. I have done it myself once or twice, and every time the land remembers. Maybe not right away, but it remembers. Caleb could have ridden on that day. He could have left a rope hanging and told himself it was not his business. Clara could have signed and survived quieter. Both would have slept. Neither would have rested. That is a lesson worth holding. Courage is not loud. Most of the time it is just a man or a woman choosing not to look away when the moment asks a question. Another lesson is this: power hates daylight. Crow worked because people stayed separate, afraid, quiet. Once the truth moved hand to hand, once weight was added, the whole thing cracked. Not because everyone became brave, but because enough people stopped pretending. You do not have to be the strongest person in the room. You just have to be honest long enough for others to see it. Clara learned something too. She learned that standing your ground does not mean standing alone. It means knowing when to ask and when to refuse to be rushed. It means keeping copies. It means trusting your own eyes when someone tells you a lie with a smile. And Caleb learned what many of us learn late. Walking away once does not mean you are done. It means you are waiting for a moment worth returning for. As the days passed, the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Water flowed the way it should. Neighbors came by, not all at once, but enough. Help was offered. Words were spoken that had been swallowed for years. Caleb and Clara worked side by side. No rush, no promises made in the heat of victory. Just shared mornings and tired evenings and the kind of respect that grows roots. Love did not arrive with fireworks. It arrived with trust. That might be the best kind. If you are listening to this and thinking about your own life, your own choices, ask yourself a few things. Where have you been quiet because it felt safer? What rope have you stepped around instead of cutting? Who is waiting for you to show up without knowing it yet? And here's another question that matters. When the moment comes, and it will come, will you recognize it as yours? If this story has stayed with you, if it has stirred something familiar, take a second and let me know by tapping like. It tells me these old stories still have work to do. And if you want to keep walking through them with me, subscribe to the channel. We take our time here. We look close. We remember. Pour yourself another cup of tea or coffee. Settle in. Tell me where you are listening from and what time it is right now. I read those, and they matter more than you think, because somewhere out there, Under an oak tree or at a kitchen table, someone is standing at the edge of a choice. And stories like this are not about the past. They are about reminding us that even now, we still get to decide who we are